Oh! 4 lights!
After being captured, Picard is made to suffer both physically and mentally at the hands of his interrogator. And in the room, there seem to be 4 lights. But the interrogator demands that Picard answers correctly and truthfully, that there are actually 5 lights in the room. And all Picard has to do is to acknowledge this lie, and his torture will end. And yet this scene is considered to be one of the most popular scenes from the entire Star Trek. It's definitely within the top 10. It's a memorable scene. You can find memes of it on the internet. And you have to wonder why. Why do people resonate so much with Picard's suffering? Because there have been other scenes involving torture in media, and none of them are as popular as this. None of them except for one. A scene from George Orwell's book. Now, Orwell was an author that was heavily critical of authoritarianism. He criticized the Nazi Party, and then he criticized the Soviet Union for its use in similar tactics. In the 1984 book, we have the famous scene where, after similar torture, both physical and mental, the protagonist is asked to answer how much is 2 plus 2. And he is expected to say 5. Now, the reason for this is to engage in doublethink. It is the ability of a totalitarian ruling party, or in this case, someone with power over someone else, to exert such control that they can even make people admit obvious falsehoods. Sensory evidence, or in this case of the novel, analytic truth, is internalized as insanity, and external statements are internalized as true, even when the subject isn't actually insane. To quote from George Orwell, in the end, the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and you would only have to believe it. It was inevitable that they should make that claim sooner or later. The logic of their position demanded it. Not merely the validity of experience, but the very existence of external reality was tacitly denied by their philosophy. The heresy of heresies was common sense. And what was terrifying was not that they would kill you for thinking otherwise, but that they might be right. For after all, how do we know that 2 and 2 makes 4? Or that the force of gravity works? Or that the past is unchangeable? If both the past and the external world exist only in the mind, and if the mind itself is controllable, how can we distinguish reality? And I'm pretty sure most people in their day-to-day lives encountered a similar situation, where they think that they know the truth based on their personal observations and their personal convictions. But they were placed in a position where someone else had power over them, so they had to lie in order not to upset the powerful. Maybe you were a kid that happens to be gay and lived in a very conservative household, so you had to lie to your parents in order for them not to find out. Maybe you're aware of Cenk Uyghur's story, who used to work for the mainstream media, and he didn't like the fact that he wanted to criticize the government, but corporate wanted him to stop. Maybe you're like one of the people living in China who was talking about COVID in the early stages, but the government would suppress them and make them disappear. Whatever the case, there are situations where a person knows something is true, or at least is convinced that is true, but a more powerful entity wants them to be quiet about it. And even worse, a more powerful entity wants you to say the exact opposite of what you think. And because of this, I think, is the reason that this scene is so popular. Why this particular scene resonates with so many people. Because on the aspect of it, it does seem harmless enough. I mean, you could just say, okay, there's 5 lights and be done with it. But I think it's the moral integrity that is being crushed here. I think it's the slippery slope that the person has to undertake the moment they lie. And the exercise itself is a lot more complex than it initially seems. Madrid could have asked Picard to say that the table is round, or to say that he is not a human but a fish. Instead, he asks him to talk about the lights. From Picard's perspective, being in a dark room with those shining lights on top of you, they must have been somewhat painful. It is easy to imagine that the lights would have been very bright and emanating heat. And for a person in the weak state of Picard, it might have been difficult to look at them. And when you look at a light long enough, you start to confuse them. Are there really 4 lights? Did you actually remember correctly? What if you're wrong? What if there's actually 5 lights, like you are being told? And this is the purpose of the experiment, is to make the person doubt, to make the person think that they can never arrive to the correct conclusion by themselves. And as such, they need to trust themselves in a much higher power that has the ability to decide truth from fiction. Because allowing the people to think for themselves is dangerous. Occasionally, people might arrive to the wrong conclusions, and those wrong conclusions can affect society as large. So we cannot allow random people to think for themselves. Random people need to listen to power. They need to listen to Madrid, because only he can have the right answers. And I think this is the core of the experiment and why it is so diabolical. Because you see, Madrid, just like myself, could have gotten Picard to simply say that there are 5 lights. All you would need is some nipple clamps and electricity, attach it to Picard and make him experience pain. And I would say, until you say that there are 5 lights, the pain will not stop. And eventually, every single person will crack just out of the sense of self-preservation. But I don't think Madrid wanted that. I don't think he wanted to just apply physical pain on the subject in order for the subject just to say the safe word and be able to escape that predicament. I think what Madrid actually wanted was for the subject to genuinely doubt themselves. To make the subject believe that he is incapable of critical thought. That no matter what he says cannot be verified as true. As such, he should only listen to Madrid and allow Madrid's judgment to be the judgment that dictates how Picard views reality. And it's also a slippery slope, because the initial question is harmless enough. How many lights are there? At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Is it 4? Is it 5? That's not the point. The point, as I mentioned before, is to make the person doubt their senses. And the second point is that once you take that first step, once you're willing to admit that you aren't capable in deciding whether there's 4 or 5 lights, if you can't do even this trivial task, what about more difficult tasks? What about when you're thinking whether or not the Federation is righteous? Whether or not you're thinking your job in the Federation is good? Should the Federation exist at all? That is where the heart of the experiment... If you can't accurately discern whether or not there's 4 or 5 lights, how can you say that the Kardashians are evil? I mean, your mental processes aren't able to discern simple things, so how can they discern much more complex, not to mention philosophical mechanisms? And this is the complete core of the experiment. It's to make the individual a complete lemming. And it is something that has been done in history by authoritarian regimes, because it's almost perfected to a science. It's almost perfected to an art. The moment you get a person to be unable to make decisions that are small in nature is the moment that you have enslaved that person. Because in our day-to-day lives, we need to constantly make decisions. And if we can't trust the decision process that we're making, we need someone else to make them for us. And I think that at a deep subconscious level, most people understand this is the essence of that scene, which is why it resonated so well with the public. But anyway, let me know what you think. I'll see you guys in the comment section. And if you like this video, please retweet it as well as give it a thumbs up. And I'll see you guys later. Take care.